Good morning, everyone. My name is Nishima Chudasama. I'm the Director of Programs at Nest Foundation, and I wanted to welcome all of you to today's online workshop. We will be focusing on supporting students during COVID-19. And I just wanted to kind of start with letting you all know who we are at Nest and a little bit about the work we do. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are based in Los Angeles, but we work nationally and primarily create materials focused on prevention education. This includes youth-facing curricula, teacher training materials, parent resources, and student leadership opportunities. If you'd like to know more about the curriculum, please email me at nishima@nestfoundation.org, or you can visit our website to learn a little bit more about that. Obviously, we are finding ourselves at an unprecedented time, and as an organization that really focuses on supporting teachers and counselors and making sure that kids are safe, we wanted to bring these virtual workshops to all of you just to either reinforce what you already know and hopefully give you some additional skills. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be recording today's webinar, and that will be available to you, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. In addition, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screens to ask questions throughout the webinar, and I'll be able to kind of share those. And towards the end, depending on the size of the group, I may even be able to kind of facilitate a conversation by unmuting everyone. But until that point, please do use the chat function. We know there's tremendous knowledge, wisdom, expertise in the group, so if there's something you'd like to share with your colleagues, please feel free to do that. With that, I will introduce Corianna Sichel, who has been supporting Nest through creating our materials, helping us evaluate our work. She'll be leading the presentation, and I'll let her introduce herself, and I'll be back on at the end. Thank you, Corianna.
Thanks, Nishima. So as Nishima mentioned, my name is Corianna Sichel. I'm a psychology fellow in the Yale School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry, and I just received my doctorate from NYU's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. I want to take a moment to thank the incredible teachers and researchers across the country whose work and wisdom made this presentation possible. When Nest asked me to put something together to support educators during COVID, these individuals were extremely generous with their time and experience. So many thanks to them. I want to start out also by thanking all of you for the thoughtful questions and concerns you sent through with your registrations. Given our time limitations, I won't be able to address each and every issue that you raised, so please feel free to bring things up in our discussion afterwards or using the chat function, as Nishima mentioned. There's also going to be a survey link available after our Zoom webinar is complete today, and I really hope that you'll take a moment to complete it. The survey is 6 questions long, and it can take you less than a minute. It gives you an opportunity to share suggestions and request additional information, and also give us some feedback on what we did well and what we could do better going forward. Today, our objectives are threefold. First, we're going to talk about child sexual and physical abuse during the pandemic. Then we will discuss some strategies for preventing and detecting and also responding to possible risk. And then finally, we'll spend some time on self-care and compassion fatigue. In order to facilitate your participation during this presentation, I'm going to be using some different Zoom features. And again, also encourage you to share questions or thoughts using the chat functions or the Q&A function on Zoom. The signs of child abuse and neglect during a pandemic are the same as they were before the pandemic. The problem is that we aren't there physically with kids to see them. But we know that teachers and schools are adapting and innovating in really incredible ways. So in addition to the tips I'm sharing during today's presentation, in the future, Nest will be facilitating opportunities for knowledge sharing through similar forums, through smaller forums and workshops. And if you or someone you know is doing something novel that's working to support teachers and families and to really get a sense of what's going on in homes, please share, either during our webinar over chat or by reaching out to us directly. So here's our first poll, and just take a moment to answer. All right. So when you have a moment, just answer with your best guess. Since 2015, rates of child abuse and neglect have decreased, increased, decreased, then increased, increased, then decreased. And we'll give everyone a minute to complete it. And let's see how we did. So hopefully our results are coming up. Yeah. All right. So we've got 58% said that rates have increased since 2015. 42% say they decreased and then increased. And no one saying that they just decreased or increased and then decreased. So actually, new federal abuse and neglect data released in January 2020 showed that there was an increase in the number of victims who suffered maltreatment for the first time since 2015. And of note, right, these data are from before the pandemic began. So in the face of COVID-19, all of this is likely to get worse. During the pandemic, rates of reporting are extremely low. And this is a huge problem. We know that abuse in general and sexual abuse in particular is underreported during normal times. And so we expect that that's just even more so the case during the pandemic. We also have reason to believe that rates of abuse may be increasing. For example, parents might be more stressed and quicker to turn to corporal punishment. And in many cases of child sexual abuse, we know that the perpetrators of child sexual abuse are known to children. So these are frequently family members or caregivers. And this means that children may be stuck at home with their abuser during the quarantine and pandemic. All of this means that there's increased risk for children, and at the same time, there are fewer calls being made to report abuse. We're all dealing with stress, but some of us are experiencing disproportionate hardship. The statistics that are coming out every day illustrate how COVID is exacerbating existing inequalities along racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and other lines. Our most vulnerable members of society are now even more so. Social distancing means that students and families no longer get the social and material support that schools provide, including access to resources and interactions with teachers and peers. For students and families, this can mean situations that were tenuous before are now becoming worse. It can also mean that families that were previously doing all right are at greater risk. And the increased reliance on online communication modalities can mean increased unsupervised screen time. All of this means that kids are more likely to be exposed to phishing, exploitation, misinformation, and explicit and violent content. Overall, again, the pandemic means lots of risk for students and their families. So we're going to talk about strategies for preventing, detecting, and responding to possible risk next. We have our second poll, which will be up in a moment. All right. So I'm confident in my ability to detect and effectively respond to student risk. And we'll close that poll. So in our group today, we have some folks who feel pretty confident in their ability, a couple of experts, And then some folks who are feeling like this might be a little bit more of an area for growth, which is great. So for those of you who feel really strong in your ability to respond, I encourage you to add suggestions to our chat. If there are things that come up that you feel have been really helpful for you or your community, we'd love to hear about them and share them more broadly with the other folks on this call. All right. So in general, and especially during the pandemic, we want to approach this work from a place of advocacy. The dictionary defines advocacy as the act or process of supporting a cause. And in this case, we're supporting students and their families. The fact that you signed up for this workshop and that so many of you feel pretty strong in your capabilities and your knowledge in this area suggests to me that you probably are already working as an advocate for your students and families. So this is really just a reminder. Advocacy starts from a place of empathy, and we have a quick little video that I'm going to share in one moment. So just bear with me.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. So being an advocate right now is particularly important because given the limitations of e-learning and social distancing during the pandemic, most of the abuse that is detected will be via student report. So students need to know that they can turn to teachers and counselors and other staff members in the school for help. And the first part of this means just really being authentic. So, I think that we can feel like we need to be doing something different, given how different everything can feel, but we don't necessarily. The same ways that you are connecting with your students by telling jokes or having certain types of conversations, all of those things you can still do. It's just through a different modality. So just remembering to be authentic and be ourselves. Validating challenges is also really important. And we heard that in the Brene Brown video just now, right? Someone saying, gosh, that sounds so hard. I don't even know what to tell you, but I'm so glad you told me that. That validation is really important. It lets people know that they've been heard. And it promotes connection by letting other people know that what they're going through is indeed hard, and it's understandable that they're having a hard time. We also want to offer tools, resources, and information, not answers. One of the most important things we can do right now is facilitate connections to resources and information. That can include local testing sites, material resources, psychological support, helping people find out what's out there, and really collaborating with them. So not telling them, oh, you have this problem, well, here's the solution, but letting them find the solution for themselves. And this relates to the next point, which is really about helping others problem solve. One way that we know from the research literature that we can build resilience is through experiences of self-efficacy and agency. So feeling like, I have this problem, but I'm able to solve it, maybe with some help, but I'm still able to solve it myself. I don't need someone to come in and save me. That's really important. So as much as possible, helping our families and our students problem solve to develop that sense of accomplishment, that'll set them up for future success as we go through this pandemic and all that follows. It's also really important to be flexible and sensitive. Our students and families come from all different backgrounds and cultures, and so something that might seem obvious to us might not be something that's culturally consistent for them. So it's really important to just keep that in mind. I apologize for the siren sound here. It should pass in a moment. And our last point is that as an advocate, it's really important to be accountable. So being accountable just means following through. And this is important because it lets students and families know that they can trust us. We're solid, we're there for them. If you tell a student that you're going to follow up, just do it. If you tell a student, you're going to follow up on Tuesday with a resource, maybe information about a food bank, and Tuesday afternoon rolls around and you don't have that information, that's okay. We're all human. But then it's really about getting on the phone or writing them that email and letting them know, hey, it's just taking a little longer, but I am on this, and we will get you the help that you need. So really following up and letting the families know, following through on what we say that we'll do. If we need to adjust the plan as we go, that's okay, but it's really important that folks know that they can count on us. As a researcher, I think about different tiers of intervention. Tier 1 or universal interventions are for all students. These interventions are focused on prevention, cultivating resilience, and healthy coping. So an example would be putting fluoride in the water to promote dental health. Some schools teach the NEST curriculum to all 10th graders, as another example. That would be a tier 1 intervention because everyone is getting it. So it's a school-wide implementation that everyone in the school gets. Other schools do socio-emotional learning in the same way. It's something that the whole school gets, and that's a tier 1 intervention. Tier 2 or selective interventions target kids who are at risk. So we suspect that there might be a problem, or perhaps one is developing. We don't know for sure. For example, a number of years ago, I worked with community partners to develop and evaluate an intervention to prevent the escalation of online altercations into real-world violence among youth who are at risk for gang involvement. our intervention was specifically targeting those kids who we suspected might be gang involved or who were likely to become gang involved in the future. And this made it a tier 2 intervention. It wasn't for everyone. It didn't go to the entire 10th grade or the whole elementary school. We really targeted these specific kids. Finally, tier 2 or indicated interventions are used when we know for a fact that there's a problem. In a classroom context, perhaps you identify a student as really struggling with math, so they have an IEP for specific measures put in place, right, that describes this is how we're going to support them in learning math. We know there's a confirmed problem and we do something to respond to it. That's a tier 3 intervention. And when we think about preventing, detecting, and responding to possible risk during the pandemic, this tiered approach can be really helpful. So prevention is about prioritizing safety and support, wrapping around our students and families during this time. It's really important to remember that the vast majority of teachers, counselors, schools, and families want the same thing for kids. We want them to thrive. So the first thing that we can think about in terms of prevention is really about teaching kids how to cope in healthy ways. We can think about ways to help them manage stress, develop healthy habits, deal with their emotions in ways that are healthy. All these things promote resilience also, and are really going to be important in preventing all sorts of negative outcomes going forward. We also want to provide information about online risk and safety, especially right now. This is super important because kids might not know what's out there and what potential risk might look like online. So for example, the NEST curriculum does this through digital citizenship, education about risk, and critical analysis of media content. The next thing, and this is so critical, we want to support students in supporting each other. Our students might know more about what's going on with each other than we do. So it's really important to provide bystander trainings so that students know the signs of risk, what to look for in their peers, and also how to get help. So just knowing what risk looks like or what danger looks like isn't enough. We need them to know that they can go to trusted adults to get their peers support. And last but not least, I've touched on this a little bit already, we want to create opportunities to cultivate resilience. And the research literature on resilience tells us that it's not something like a gene that you either have or you don't have. We can all be resilient. And so ways to do this include connecting with other people, opportunities for agency, feelings of accomplishment, realizing that I can succeed in the face of difficulty, and also creativity, opportunities for expression, cultivate resilience. The NEST Resources website has a plethora of resources, including these two, which I wanted to just take a moment to highlight that can be really helpful when we think about Tier 1 prevention efforts in particular. So this first resource is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and describes different signs and symptoms of COVID-related stress by age group, with suggestions about how to help kids cope. And the second resource here is an app that was co-curated by the National Center for PTSD and the VA. It has a wealth of information and includes links to local and national resources and everything from mental health support to places for people to get food. It also has tools for self-assessment and stress management and educational content for kids of different ages. So there's a ton of great stuff on the NEST resources page. We'll have a link to it at the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to take a moment to highlight two things that I think are particularly helpful when we think about sharing resources with families and students during the pandemic. So we're moving right along to Tier 3, identifying risk. This is about detection. the situation that we all find ourselves in and our circumstances are so different that we can feel ill-equipped. But the thing is that the content of interactions rely on the same experiences and expertise that you all bring to your work every day, whether it be in the classroom or the counseling room. And it might feel like you need to do something very different because everything looks different, but again, that's not necessarily true. So it's really important that we all trust our intuition and our experience, especially now. I had a slide earlier about the signs. It's so important that we know the signs of child sexual and physical abuse and neglect. It's important to realize that these signs can also overlap with signs of stress that kids might be experiencing during the pandemic. But it's really important to know what to be on the lookout for. And there are resources on the Nest resources page as well if you feel like you want a little bit of a refresher on that. It's also really important right now to provide information to kids, especially kids who we are concerned might be at risk. We want to provide information to all kids, but especially those who fall into this tier 2 space. We want them to know what abuse is and also the resources that are out there to help kids so that they can have some recourse and know where to go. And so these are kids, right, who we suspect there might be something going on, but we're not sure. We don't have a confirmed disclosure, perhaps. So we want them to know that maybe what's happening in their home isn't okay, and that there are options out there to keep them safe and get them the help that they need. It's really important right now to check in on students and let them know that we're there for them and that we care. I know some schools will have teachers kind of randomly assigned to check in on, let's say, 20 students every week or something like that. And that's a great way to make sure that outreach is being made. But it's also really important for teachers who have personal relationships with students to be doing that outreach in whatever form it can take. I mean, obviously, a Zoom call or something where you're seeing kids is ideal, but if it has to be over phone or even email or text, it's really important that we reach out and check in. And it's important, especially in for these tier 2 kids, that we ask them, I know that you were having a really hard time with your dad before all of this started. I just wanted to see how things are going. So asking those questions can be a really important intervention and can really help kids a lot. We also want to be strategic. So I've been working with Nest on adapting the Nest curriculum, for example, for the pandemic. And one of the things that we suggest that teachers do is when there's sensitive content that might potentially put kids at additional risk, for example, descriptions of what child abuse and neglect are. We want kids to have that content available, but maybe do it in a way that protects them. So we want them, for example, to have their backs to a wall so that other people in the home can't see that content on the screen. We also want them to wear headphones. That said, at other times, we really want kids sitting so that we can get a view into the home and to kind of see what's going on. We also really want kids to be using the chat function if they feel like they can't speak safely, or if there might be other people in the room, it can be a lot safer to have them use chat and they can feel more comfortable doing that as well. On a video call, we can look at how the house appears, kind of get a sense for signs of increased frustration, and kind of seeing maybe how students are interacting with other people in their homes. That can then be a foray into a check-in call. I noticed, for example, you could say, I noticed on the Zoom call the other day that you were kind of arguing with your brother. Is everything okay there? How's it going with your mom and your dad? We also really want to pay attention to student assignments. And this is actually something that we've heard from teachers during the pandemic, that kids aren't necessarily coming forward to disclose as they may have before, but that they're starting to kind of leave signs in their assignments that they're having a really hard time. So it's really important to pay attention to their assignments and what they're saying. So since we aren't seeing kids in person, disclosures are a very important way of learning about potential child abuse and neglect, and no two disclosures are the same. So I just wanted to take a moment for us to kind of think about some of the different types of disclosures that we might encounter. The first kind is purposeful. During a purposeful disclosure, a kid is really aware of what's going on. Maybe maybe it's been happening for a while. They've made a decision that they want this to stop. They're going to take control of the situation, and they very purposefully come to an adult and disclose abuse that was going on. This contrasts with prompted. So prompted disclosures are what happens when you have a kid who, you call in, you do a check-in. Hey, I was wondering, how's everything going? You were having a hard time with your dad before. How is it now? And then you find out that something is happening that maybe isn't okay. Piecemeal disclosures happen when kids give you fragments or bits of information. So things might not quite add up, the timeline doesn't really make sense, and you kind of have to try and link everything together to really figure out what's going on. And then last but not least, accidental disclosures happen when kids aren't intending to disclose. So for example, someone walks in on the child abuse, someone overhears the child talking about abuse and then follows up on it. And it's really important to remember that during accidental disclosures, kids are often not ready to talk about the abuse. And that can be a particularly vulnerable time. So the main point of all of this is that, there's no one type of disclosure, and you might have a disclosure that catches you off guard. You might put together bits of information in that piecemeal situation and realize that you need to make a report. And it's also important to know that sometimes kids may never disclose. So responding to disclosures, this is what we have in our tier 3. This is when we know for a fact that abuse is going on. And this can be a balancing act between your responsibility to report and the potential needs of the child who has disclosed. So during the disclosure, it's super important that the first thing that we do is validate and support. And this will be very familiar to those of you who feel really strong in your abilities in this area. The first thing we want to do when a kid says this bad thing happened is tell them, I'm so glad that you told me. That was really brave. And it sounds like what was going on was really, really difficult. And this, again, lets them know that they can trust us and that we hear them and that we're taking them seriously. Another really important thing, and we know about this from the literature on trauma-informed interventions, we want to give kids options. During the disclosure and follow-up process, we can give kids options to let them have a sense of control and agency. And this is, again, really important in going back to helping them through this experience and helping them move on from it. And they don't have to be big choices. You're obviously not going to give a child a choice between, do you want me to report this, right? If it's reportable, you have to report it. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. But you can give kids other options. Like, for example, hey, you seem really upset. Do you want to take 3 deep breaths together or go get a drink of water? Or if you're following up with a kid, you can say, hey, I'm gonna follow up with you. Do you want me to email you or text you? Just any little thing that we can do to give kids a chance to take some control back in the situation, because abuse really is, when abuse is happening, it means that they're they're in a situation where they don't have any control. So we want to give them an experience where we're giving them some of that control back. And last but not least, it's really important to be transparent. And I know that, this kind of can vary depending on district and schools, but we really want to be as open as possible with parents and families and kids about what we're doing and what they can expect to happen next. And that's really important for maintaining relationships. It's part of being an advocate. It goes back and links into being accountable. And it's super important because families and kids can feel really vulnerable after they make a disclosure. And so being transparent, again, gives them some of that control back. It lets them know what to expect and that they can trust us. So sometimes we make a report and things don't go the way that we hope. And it can just be overwhelming and we can feel so powerless. So what do we do, right? If we make a report and nothing happens, we make a report and they close the case, even though we know perhaps that there's really something dangerous going on. If we suspect that abuse is going on, but we don't know if there's enough information, if you're just worried about kids who don't potentially have contact with mandated reporters on a regular basis, or if you don't know if you should make a report or not. Some of the really important things here to keep in mind, we want to stay in contact with kids. So, if you make that report and nothing seems to be happening, don't then drop off communication with the child who you're concerned about. Keep that contact constant. Keep gathering information. Work with other people. No one should be facing any of this alone. If you're a teacher who's on a team, reach out to the other teachers who are on your team. Find a colleague who can be your partner in providing support for families and children during this time. If you're not sure about whether or not you have enough information for a report, you can call anyway. You can call ACS or your local child protective agency and let them know, hey, here's what I have. Do I have enough? And they'll tell you. And you can also follow up with them. They are all working. So it's okay to follow up and to be persistent and to make a second report if you feel the need. Being an advocate and doing all of this can mean that you're suddenly carrying a lot and getting a lot more information about your students than you had before. You might be glimpsing into their homes and seeing things that are really hard and challenging. So being an advocate means that you also need to take care of yourself. So that's what we're going to talk about next. I love this quote. Audre Lorde said, "I have come to believe that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. Caring for myself is an act of survival." So you aren't only people's teachers or counselors. Many of you are also caregivers yourselves, perhaps homeschooling your own little ones, caring for elderly relatives and pets, and other members of your communities. And in order to continue to do this, you also need to take care of yourself. So secondary traumatic stress is what happens when we hear about something terrible happening to someone else. It's not a bad thing that happened to us directly. Maybe it's learning about abuse that happened to a student, or something terrible that happened to a loved one, or maybe a colleague who lost someone during the pandemic. But it's not something that's happening directly to us. This contrasts with primary traumatic stress. And primary traumatic stress happens when something bad happens directly to us. So, we're dealing with difficulty in our own lives. Not something that we're hearing about, but something that we're living through. And frequently, when we have secondary traumatic stress and primary traumatic stress, this can lead to what we call compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue happens, oh, sorry, I have a visitor. Compassion fatigue happens when we've got this experience of really kind of not being able to deal with things. So we might feel exhausted, angry, depressed, and the opposite of compassion fatigue really is compassion satisfaction, which is that joy that we feel when we're engaging in our work, caring for others, and feeling really fulfilled. And compassion fatigue can lead to this, burnout. Burnout can come from feeling overwhelmed, feeling like we can't make a difference, it's all too much, and we just can't do it anymore. So as a cat lover, I really love this little graphic. It comes from the Compassion and Resilience Toolkit, which has wonderful resources for educators, schools, and families. And we might start out as zealots. We're out to save the world. And then after a little bit, like maybe a couple months into the pandemic, we're likely to feel ourselves becoming increasingly irritable, withdrawing, maybe failing to connect with those people who help us take care of ourselves. And then we enter the zombie phase when everything feels overwhelming. It's too much, and we just can't do it. And either at that point we refuel and practice compassion resilience through self-care, or we burn out and we end up leaving the professions that we're in because we just can't do it and it's not sustainable. So I want you to take a moment and think about what type of self-care you're relying on most during these times. Waiting on a few more responses. All right, so we've got a pretty even distribution around emotional self-care, activities that help us connect, process, and reflect on a full range of emotions. Some practical self-care, this is actually our winners, tasks that can make us feel productive. Not a lot of physical self-care, some mental self-care, and also some social self-care. Nice. So I'm going to take us through a quick self-care assessment, and I'm going to encourage that you actually go to the Nest resources page after our webinar and really take some time with this assessment. There's a PDF version of this that's available there, and really think about, you know, how are you doing with your self-care. So for a self-care assessment, we want to think about what have we done in the past that really worked, but that we might not be engaging in any longer. Ask ourselves, why did we stop? Maybe, you know, you were running regularly and then it got cold outside, so you stopped. Whatever that reason is. Maybe your self-practice stopped working for you. But just ask yourself why you stopped. And then I want you to think about a self-care practice in the present that you're working well for you. So those self-care practices that we all just thought of. And do you think you'll continue it? Are you going to do it tomorrow? Are you going to do it the day after? What about after the pandemic? Ask yourself what could interfere with you continuing it. And then ask yourself about one self-care practice that you would like to commit to in the future. Maybe it's continuing that self-care practice that you are already doing. Maybe it's picking up something that you did before. Maybe it's something new. And ask yourself, why have you not tried it or committed to it yet? Why does it take this webinar for you to really commit to it? And what needs to happen for you to do that and for you to engage in that self-care activity? And if after all of that, you're like, you know what, I really don't know about self-care, and I feel like I'm having a really hard time finding things to do, I have a list here of 7 self-care practices for educators that are just to get you started. So connecting with others, that social connection is so important, especially in times of distancing. Pick up the phone, write a letter, write an email, get on that silly Zoom call with, you know, all of your college friends, but really find some time and some ways to connect with other people. Maybe it's with colleagues, people who you love, people who you have shared experiences with. It's also really important to rely on healthy rituals and routines. These things can really give us a sense of certainty, and we can find a lot of solace in them. I have a friend who's been exercising at 5 p.m. every day. I admire her greatly. We also want to remember what our values are. You know, why did you become a teacher? I imagine that there's a value in there that's core to that. And really connecting to that can help refuel. And then really practicing our own version of balance. So as I said, my friend is exercising every day at 5. Maybe that's not right for me. And I think that during this time, it can be really easy to engage in comparisons, other people's beautiful sourdough loaves, or, you know, their super productive artistic projects that they're engaging in over the pandemic. All of that comparison can really be quite harmful. So we want to just focus on, okay, what's our version of balance? What's my version of balance in this moment? Not my partners, not my kids, not my colleagues. What does being balanced mean for me? Practicing self-awareness. This is just mindfulness, being able to observe ourselves as an outsider, paying attention to our own thoughts and feelings in the moment without judgment. Sometimes people will use their 5 senses to engage in mindfulness. What am I seeing? What am I hearing right now? Just going through the 5 senses. And then gratitude is a really powerful self-care practice. What's something that you're grateful for? And that can really be quite powerful. And then last but not least, take a minute to laugh. Ask a kid to tell you a joke. Watch a funny movie. We know from the science that laughing changes our brain chemistry and is really healthy and can be a good relief. So here is a link to the resources page. Nishima and her colleagues have assembled a really wonderful collection of things for you all to access. And I hope that you'll take a moment to fill out the post-Zoom survey. It's really quite helpful as we think about what we're going to do, what NEST is going to do after this webinar series is done to continue to support teachers and counselors and school communities in being there for kids. The survey is 6 questions long, super fast, and it also gives you an opportunity to request topics for future workshops.
Thank you so much, Corianna, for that presentation, and for all of you for participating. We hope there were some things in there that were reminders, some things that were new information for you. If you do visit the resources page, you'll be able to access some of the links and really great material that people have been putting out there. We do also have some time for questions or information sharing. If any of you want to use the chat function, or if I did it right, you should be able to unmute yourself and just speak your question. We do invite that. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be having all of this, the PowerPoint as well as the video, available for you to to watch. One thing I did want to mention is a special summer series that we are crafting at the moment, just to do a deeper dive on some of the great questions that you all submitted during your registrations. We know there's a need for some deeper dives in some topics, especially as we're thinking about transitioning back to school. And so look out for emails from us as we finalize and organize those. We certainly want to invite knowledge from all of you in that, and we'll be formatting those a little bit differently so it's much more conducive to our conversation. But with that said, I will kind of pause to see if there are any questions or comments, or if any of you want to share resources, we'd love to hear from you. Or even any particularly challenging moments that you'd like to hear from Corianna about, or your colleagues about, some insights on, we welcome that as well.
Hello.
Hi, Trista.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
First, this was great. Thank you to the two of you. I really appreciate, the information that you was giving us today. Definitely gives a different perspective of certain things. I wanted to say that when we were talking about ways of coping, I was clicking so many of them because I do a bit of all of them. But the spiritual part for me works a lot, relying on my faith and just, for me, just trusting how God is going to pull us through. And that's where I really land a lot. But I wanted to go over something about the secondary traumatic stress and primary trauma and stress. Would you be able to speak a little bit about that again, to make a stronger connection about it? I had missed a little bit of that piece, and I just wanted to see if I could hear it again to make sure I took my notes accurately, please.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do that. And thank you so much for that question. So secondary trauma and secondary traumatic stress are what we feel when we find out about something bad happening to someone else. And it's really that experience of realizing that, the world isn't safe. It's not safe for other people because we know that bad things are happening to other people. And so that's the secondary traumatic stress. It's a trauma that's happening not to us directly, but to someone we know. It can even be someone in our community. So, you hear about a shooting or a terrible crisis that happens, or, a friend loses someone during the pandemic, or you even just see footage of news media footage covering how many people have been lost during the pandemic. It's not something that's happening directly to you. It's this thing that's happening to someone else in the world.
Thank you.
Yep. And then the primary is what's happening to you. And when we've got the primary plus the secondary, that can lead to compassion fatigue and just feeling like it's too much. I can't. And that in turn can result in burnout. Does that answer?
It makes sense, yes, because I wasn't getting it at first on how the equation lined up, but I totally get it now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for that great question. Any others? We do invite, again, also questions, comments, or just sharing some of your experiences in the last few minutes that we have together.
I would love to hear about, from any of you who want to share how you're doing. And even if it's just, as our last participant said, how she's coping. It would be great to hear.
Look, if it's no one else, I'll go again.
All right.
I'm a guidance counselor, so some days it's challenging. I spoke to a family. The parent told me they lost 17 members of their family.
Oh.
17.
Oh my goodness.
So, you're on the phone. This is the work that you do, right? So these are your parents, and I'm thinking about the students, her two children, and how do you come back to even dealing with the process of the bereavement process and counseling kids with 17 members of a family?
Yeah.
That number alone is just so great. So
Yeah.
When you're talking to multiple families, because we're contacting and doing the outreach to our students, right? And you're constantly hearing it day by day, along with just with what you said, right? That's the secondary. Even for me as the adult, now going to the primary, what's going on with, you know, the people who are closely connected to me or directly impacting my life. You take that and you do just feel burned out. You know, you can find yourself being very weepy. You're walking around, you're cleaning the bathroom, and you're crying in the middle of mopping the floor. And,
Yeah.
you know, you look at the commercial and see the news and you're like, oh no, something else. Like it's sometimes very, very hard to bear. So, you know, just day by day, connecting with staff members, friends and family, church members, you know, family members, that's helping because, and laughing and being able to laugh, right? Trying to do a Zoom party, a dance party, and trying to act silly and just make jokes on how we're all trying to learn how to use technology because a lot of us don't, you know, so that's helping. But having these type of workshops and webinars that you guys are giving, it definitely helps you put language to what you're feeling. A lot of things you may have learned, but you needed to be, you know, you needed to be refreshed. And when you're putting it all back together, it helps you make sense when you can identify it and then work on strategies to help you make it through, you know?
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that, you know, so much of what you said feels really relevant to experiences, right, beyond people in education. And I think some important parts, right, were that, like, remembering the things that we're grateful for, remembering that we know a lot of this stuff already, but we might need a refresher, and that's okay. Connecting, and, you know, listening. I think what you did with that family, just the fact that you listened to that mom who said that she lost 17 people, I think that sometimes that's really important. So thank you for all that you're doing. It's really incredible.
Oh, praise God. I appreciate your kind words. You're just trying to do your part. Just trying to do your part.
Thank you so much, Trista. What a powerful story. You know, it makes me think that all of you are pioneers in this moment, and you know, in the future, you'll be lending your expertise based on what you've done now to support your kids. You know, in the future, to teachers and educators, and please know that we're all figuring this out together, and we really do appreciate what you do every day. It's beyond something I can even comprehend, holding all that you hold. So thank you for that work. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you were able to get something out of it. We certainly always are when we hear from teachers and counselors. And if you received an email about this, we have your information, and we'll be sending out more info on both how to access the slideshow and the video for this, but also our summer series. And if you want to know more about some of our curriculum materials, my email address I'll just put in the chat box is nishima@nestfoundation.org. Also, some folks on previous webinars have requested certificates. If that's something that you would like, please email me at that email address with your name as it should appear on the certificate, and I'll be able to get that to you in the next few days.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
You ladies did an awesome job.
Thank you, Trista. Thank you all for joining us, and Corianna, I'll just let you say any final words.
Just keep it up.
Yes.
Keep on feeling those feelings.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your week, and reach out if we can support you in any additional way.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.